Now, on our previous video, we saw how do we expand logarithms. So this is part two, which in this video, we will not see how do we expand it, but we're going to see the opposite. We're going to see how do we compress it. How do we write a logarithm expression as a single log. So our previous video was about how do we rewrite the expression in more than one logarithm. How do we make it larger? Now in this video, we're going to see how do we shorten an expression when we're dealing with logarithms. So that is called the compression of a logarithm. Now, if we read the direction here, it says we need to rewrite the following as a single logarithm. So if it says that we need to write an expression as a single logarithm, in a way, we're just compressing. We're just rewriting the expression as one single logarithm. Now, how do we do that? We're still going to use the same three rules that we have here, but now we're going to do the opposite. I find compressing a little bit easier than expanding, but that's just me. Now, one thing that I wanted to mention is that one key idea here is that you can only compress or expand logarithms if they have the same base. That is, if they have the same number underneath the logarithm. We will talk about bases in our future videos, but right now notice that we can only compress or expand if they have that same little number here, which is called the base. All of our examples are going to have the same base, but notice that you need to check sometimes. If they have the same base, then we can apply that. In this case, they all have the same base, so we can proceed. Now, how do we compress a logarithm? Let's actually talk about the problem now. How do we compress a logarithm? Well, we're going to use the three rules here. Notice that here we talked about subtraction. So the first rule doesn't talk about subtraction. No. The second rule talks about addition. No. So here our third rule talks about subtraction. And what does a rule says? A rule says that if we're subtracting two logarithms, we can just write as a single logarithm where we're going to be dividing the top minus the bottom, or the left divided by the right. So here, if we're subtracting, we can write it as division. Here we're subtracting, so we can write this as division, and this is going to be log of 6, which is the base that I was speaking of. And because it's subtraction, we're going to divide. And how do we divide? The left, which is u, divided by the right, which is b. Here, notice that all are we doing? We're just dividing what we're taking the log off, because rule number 3 says if you subtract, you can just rewrite it as division. Let's look at example 2. In example 2 here, example 2, well, notice that we are subtracting, so we can apply the same rule number 3. But before we start applying any rules, you need to make sure you don't have an exponent here. Here, we have exponents in front, coefficients, I'm sorry. Here we have coefficients in front of the log. Here we have a 2 in front of this logarithm, and here we have an 8 in front of this logarithm. So first, we need to apply rule number 1, because rule number 1 says if we have a number in front of the logarithm, we can just bring this as an exponent, which is basically the opposite of what we were doing on our previous videos. So here we have a number, and because of rule number 1, if we have a number in front of the logarithm, we can bring this as an exponent. So we're going to bring this as an exponent. So because of rule number 1, we can rewrite this as the log 6 u, and now it's going to have a new exponent, which is 2, minus log 6 b, but now our number is our exponent, so that's b8. So this is what we have now. Now that we do not have any single number in front of the logarithm, we can apply rule number 3, where it says if you're subtracting, you can just divide the insides. So that's exactly what we're going to be doing here. What is it that we're going to be dividing? We're going to be dividing the u to the second and the b to the 8th. So let's just write that as a single logarithm because we're compressing. So we're going to have log 6 left, which is u to the second, divided by right, which is b to the 8th. And we're done. Now let's talk about one more example here. In example number 3, notice the same. If you have a number in front of the logarithm and you want to compress it, the first thing they want to do is rewrite that number as an exponent. So notice that here we have an 8 in front of the logarithm. Because of rule number 1, we can bring this 8 as an exponent. So now we have log of 5, 8 to the 8th, plus, notice that here we have a 2 as well. So we can bring this 2 as an exponent because of rule number 1. So it says log of 5 b to the second. We can do this because of rule number 1. If you have a number in front of the logarithm, you can just bring that number as an exponent, and that's exactly what we do here. And now that we do not have any number in front of the logarithm, we can apply rule 1 or 2. But because here we're adding, we're going to apply rule number 2. And rule number 2 says if you're adding logarithms, you can just multiply the insides. So here, what exactly are we going to be multiplying? We're going to multiply the insides, which is 8 to the 8th and b to the second. So because of rule number 2, we can just rewrite this as log 5, the first thing, the first expression inside the logarithm, 8 to the 8th times b to the second. Because remember that addition is multiplication in logarithm. So lastly, let's look at example 4. In example 4 here, again, the first thing they want to do is notice if you have any number or any coefficient in front of the logarithm, which we do. Here we have a 3. So because of rule number 1, we can bring this 3 as an exponent. So now we have log x to the third minus this 5, we can bring this as an exponent. So now it becomes log y to the 5th. Now we can apply the rule number 1 or 2. But notice that we're subtracting, and rule number 3 talks about subtraction. Subtraction is division, so we just divide. So now this becomes log left, which is x to the third, which is the thing that we're taking the log of, divided by the thing that we're taking the log of on the right, which is y to the 5th. And that's it. We just compress the expression. We just wrote it as a single logarithm. So now, here's your entrance ticket. The first example here is just like the first video that you saw, which is expanding. And the second example here is like the second video, which is compressing.